Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inshallah, today we'll be starting a new chapter, and that is Babu Salat al-Musafir. It's a chapter speaking about the Salah of a traveler. A Salah of a traveler. And remember, we're going according to the Hanafi madhab. The other madhahib, they have a few different rulings. So they first tell you is what's the definition of safar, travel, okay? Where the rulings that a person had whilst they were resident actually changed. They say that first is a person intends to travel, okay? أن يقصد السفر, okay? They intend to travel. And the distance between themselves and the destination is what a person would travel, let's say on camel or walking, etc., for 3 days and 3 nights, okay? 3 days and 3 nights. Now, in those days, remember the people mainly traveled with camel. So after we had our cars and modern transport, you find that the ulama, they said that if you had to travel, for example, in an aeroplane for 4 hours, you would cover a journey which would have taken the people before 10 to 20 days. So what they did was they calculated that, okay, in our terms, if a person travels a certain amount of kilometers and they're on a journey, then we will consider them to be a musafir. And they have different answers from their calculations. And what we could say is that it's roughly 80 kilometers. Okay? And what you must remember is that there's an opinion. The first is where they actually tried to work out the kilometers. So you find 80, those who say about 90, those say 120 and a little bit more, etc. But these stuck to a distance which was fixed. So for example, if you're going from wherever you are to another city, which is 100 kilometers away, you would be considered to be a musafir. Okay? There is a second opinion. Some of the ulama mention that if you're traveling, and even if it's slightly less than 80 kilometers, but according to the urf or according to the norm, it's considered travel, then you would be counted as a traveler. But remember here we're going according to the madhahib. So they have a fixed distance which they've put. So that's number one. Number two is that you find what does a person get to do once they're on this type of journey? When it comes to their salah, okay, they allowed to shorten the salah. They allowed to shorten the salah. Is it all salawat? No. Any salah which has 4 raka'at, they can read it as 2. So for example, you've got dhuhr, you've got asr, and you've got isha. As for fajr, you can't read it as 1, and as for maghrib, you can't read it as 1.5. So dhuhr, asr, and isha, you can shorten to 2. The scholars agree on this whilst you are traveling. After that, what about a person gathering between the salah or joining the salah? In the Hanafi madhab, they have what's called jam' suri, which is it's just an apparent version of you joining, but it's not really you joining. So for example, they say dhuhr, you read at the end time of dhuhr, and asr, you read at the beginning time of asr. So you've still read every salah in its time. As for the other madhahib, some of them at least, they allow you to read dhuhr and asr either in the time of dhuhr or either in the time of asr, maghrib and isha either in the time of maghrib or either in the time of isha. So that's number one. Number two is that if the person is fasting, then they allowed to break their fast. A traveler, as you know, doesn't have to fast. A traveler doesn't have to fast. Number three, also when it comes to nawafil or salah, which was sunnah muakkada, person is allowed to leave them except for salah, the 2 raka'at, which are voluntary before fajr, even though they're sunnah, but they're highly emphasized. Okay? And as for the salah, as for the witr salah, again, the Messenger ﷺ didn't leave it when he was a resident or when he was traveling. So those two a person should still read. As for example, the sunnah of dhuhr, or the sunnah of asr, sunnah of maghrib, etc. Sunnah of Isha, a person doesn't have to lead or read. When does a person become a traveler? Do we say that, for example, let's say this is your house and you're leaving the city, and when do you become a traveler? They say once you've left, the boundary of the city, i.e., you've left the buildings. So, as you know, the cities are generally built up in the center, and then as you go away from the city, you find that you've left the city center, you've left the built up areas, and it becomes places which are not really built. So, once you've left that, usually it's a few kilometers out of the city, etc., all the ahkam or all the rulings of travel apply, in the sense that you're allowed to break your fast, in the sense that you're allowed to shorten your salah, etc. Okay? Then they give you a few different ahkam. In the Hanafi madhab, as long as a person doesn't intend to stay in the place he's traveling to or at his destination more than 15 days, he's considered a traveler. Okay? So, for example, a person is going out for a week to a distant place, is considered a traveler in the Hanafi madhab. 10 days is considered a traveler in the Hanafi madhab. 14 days considered a traveler in the Hanafi madhab. The minute you're going over 15, now you're considered to be a muqim. Do we say that a person has to stay the first 14 days, he'll be considered as the first 14 days he'll be considered as a traveler, and then the next few days he'll be considered as somebody who is a resident? We say no. As long as when you're leaving, you've intended and you know that you're going to stay more than 15 days, then you become a traveler. The Jumhur, the other ulama, majority of them mention that these ahkam last for 3 days, and then they differ on the 3 days. Do you count the day you left and the day you're going to leave or not, etc.? The Hanafi madhab allow 15 days. So that's important to mention. Then, if a person is traveling, okay, and then he doesn't know when he's going to return, okay, but you know that I might return tomorrow, I might return the next day, I might return the following day. Here, based on some of the athar of Ibn Abbas and Ibn Umar, say a person is still considered to be a traveler, even if he had to stay 6 months to a year longer. Why? Because he traveled in the first place, and then, I might be going tomorrow, I might be going the next day, I might be going the next day, but he's not sure. So he started off as a traveler, and he's not sure when he's going to break his travel. Thereafter, what happens if you go to a place and you find that you are a traveler? In the Hanafi madhab, they're quite strict with a person only reading 2 raka'at wherever there's 4. Are you allowed to read behind an imam who is completing his salah? The answer is yes. So if the imam is reading 4, for example, you follow him and you read behind him. As for if it's the opposite, where the person who's traveling is leading the salah and the people behind him are all resident, then he can read 2 raka'at only because he's a traveler, and then those behind him, they will complete the other 2 because they are resident. So that's again another mas'ala which they mention. Thereafter, they mention 2 or 3 more masail, or a few more masail. One of them being that if a person was traveling, okay, let's say you in your city or at your home, and you need to go to a place for 2 days. So you'll be a traveler those 2 days, and then you're going to come back home and you're only going to stay for a day. Then you're going to travel again. When you return back to your house, will you still be considered a traveler, bearing in mind that you're only there for a day? Here we'll say no, because you've returned to your original place of residence. Even if you're going to stay for a few hours or a day or a few days, the fact that it is your resident, you are resident, and the ahkam of a resident applies to you. The ahkam of a resident applies to you. Mas'ala similar to that is, let's say you are living in a country, okay? Let's say you are living in England, and then later on you moved countries. You moved to Germany, for example. You sold up everything. You moved to Germany, and now you became a resident there. And eventually you return back to visit your first place of residence, which is in England. As long as you are less than 14 days you will be considered a traveler, even though you may have lived in that house, etc. And then the last mas'ala I want to touch on is if a person missed a salah, if a person missed a salah whilst traveling and became a resident, so let's say dhuhr or asr or isha, which is 2 raka'at whilst they're traveling, they only have to make up 2, even if they become a resident. And the opposite is also true. If a person missed a salah whilst he was a resident and then traveled, he has to make it up fully. Why? Because you look at when you missed that salah, what condition were you in? Those are some of the masail of safar. There'll be a few more, inshallah. We'll take a few of them on Monday and we'll finish the chapter. But that's the main, or those are the main masail which I mentioned.